And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Apple's cash stash continues to grow after a strong third quarter that beat on revenue, and that's before the launch of its most anticipated iPhone yet. I talked to CEO Tim Cook about the quarter, his thoughts coming up. Plus, Sprint continues its quest for the right partner, and Wall Street may be buying in. The struggling telecom posted its first profit in 3 years, despite a second straight quarter of subscriber losses. And Facebook's hardware ambitions, a device to bring its 2 billion friends even closer together using AI, and a standalone speaker to challenge Amazon and Google are in the pipeline. We'll discuss the first major products from its Building 8 lab. But first, to our lead, and that, of course, Apple. Apple surpassing 1.2 billion iPhones ever sold. Shares are popping in after-hours trading. The company reporting third-quarter revenue of just under $45.5 billion. That is up 7% from the same quarter last year. Apple also issued revenue guidance for the fourth quarter that beat analyst estimates, and almost 2/3 of Apple's revenue is coming from international sales. I just got off the phone with Apple CEO Tim Cook. He told me, quote, "We're very happy to give guidance of $49 to $52 billion. We really like what we see for the beginning of the back-to-school season." Now, guidance is very important because it signals strong sales of new iPhones scheduled to be released yet later this year. And while Apple doesn't talk about future products, Cook reiterated to me that it appears more users are waiting than usual to upgrade in the hopes of a new iPhone due to increased media reports. He said, "It feels like the rumors are much louder and much more frequent this year than in the past, so we do believe that has created a pause. It's likely larger than previously." Joining me here in the studio, Forrester principal analyst Julie Osk, and from New York, Bloomberg Gadfly's Shira Ovide. So, Julie, Apple shares up more than 5% right now. Why?
So I think there's a lot to look forward to here. On one hand, the smartphone market is going to grow by about 50% over the next 5 years, so there's a lot of upside in that market. But there's a lot more to come. There's a lot more to come with the smartphone living within a bigger ecosystem inside of people's homes. A lot of upside to come with things like virtual assistants and voice assistants when they launch their HomePod here in December. And then there's all of the services that they sell, whether it's Apple Pay or the content that they sell.
The services business hitting an all-time quarterly record. He told me over the last 12 months, services has become the size of a Fortune 100 company. It's a milestone we had projected to meet, but not this soon. We couldn't be happier with how that business is going.
Yeah, so I think they have to be happy about that. That's going to be an important revenue stream for Apple, just like it's going to be for some of its competitors as we look forward, as these other hardware markets begin to mature.
Shira, what's your take on the broader Apple ecosystem? We focus so much on the iPhone, and we know that we're expecting a new iPhone in the fall, but everything else is also moving the boat, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it was impressive that in the third quarter, when you saw iPhone unit sales in particular be basically flat, that services, which are things like App Store downloads and Apple Music subscriptions, that rose very strongly. And so the big question for me is, can that services revenue continue to grow quickly even if iPhone sales don't, right? So how independent is services revenue from the iPhone?
Okay, so on that note, everybody was focused on this revenue guidance because it may give some indication, Julie, of when the new iPhone will start being accounted for in their revenue. What do you make of it? Because on the one hand, services could make up for a greater portion of the revenue. On the other hand, that iPhone could come sooner than we think.
Yeah, so I think, the services isn't going to move the needle that much in the near term. I mean, primarily, Apple is still a hardware company. 60 to 70% of their revenue still comes from the smartphone. That's still going to be their biggest category here in the foreseeable future.
Let's talk a little bit about China. We saw a 10% decline year over year, but that decline is slowing. So last quarter, it was a 14% decline. When I talked to Tim Cook about China, he said, the results are very encouraging. We thought we would improve some, but we improved a bit more. If you look at Mac sales in mainland China, we had a June quarter record. iPad results were strong. The services business is extremely strong. And the iPhone on a year-over-year basis in mainland China was essentially flat, similar to IDC's projection of the market. So we feel really good. Shira, what do you make of this?
No matter what Tim Cook says, the most important question for Apple right now is how will the next versions of the iPhone sell in China? And at least from what I see, I don't see a lot of encouraging signs that this was the 6th quarter in a row that Apple had declining revenue in China. The technology market in China has changed just markedly since late 2014 when Apple got a big lift from iPhone 6 sales in China. And I don't know what the iPhone demand is in China for the next version of the iPhone. And to me, that's the biggest question hanging over the company.
We do, of course, look at the rankings all the time, and there are those local brands that are now surpassing Apple in China.
Yeah, so I think one of the things to look at is Apple still gets like 85 to 90% of the profits that are in smartphone hardware sales. And I think that's important because Apple's not trying to win the race to the bottom here. They're not trying to be, and they won't be ever, like the #1 smartphone maker in the world. I think the question becomes like, how well are they doing with China's, let's say, middle class or affluent, and those that can afford to buy more than one device or an ecosystem of devices, I think is one point. And then I think the second thing that will guide how well Apple does in China is how well do they do with services? How well do they do with the Chinese language and providing those services that the Chinese population wants?
Something else, Shira, that is, of course, interesting is that with the new iPhone that we are expecting in the fall, whether it's called the iPhone 8 or the iPhone X, we could see a 4-digit price tag on the highest priced iPhone, the one that we are expecting will have an OLED screen. So even as competition in China is rising, the price is going up. Are consumers going to want to pay for it?
I don't think anyone really knows what demand is going to be for an iPhone that is $1,000, $1,400 in that range. I mean, we're really talking about a brave new world here of iPhone pricing. Interestingly, some of the analysts in China who follow that market and who live in China say that, price is sort of an interesting signal that if it's expensive, then it's considered a luxury good and people might want it more. But I don't think anybody really knows what demand is going to be like for a $1,000 and up iPhone.
I want to point out a couple of other things. One is that we saw iPad sales increase, Julie, and iPad and the state of the iPad has been a question. Also, Tim Cook pointed out to me enthusiasm for AirPods. Of course, this is a lower revenue product, but they are increasing their production capacity for it, and they're very optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a 6 to 8 week wait to get AirPods since they were first launched. So, yeah, no, I mean, they should increase capacity, right? It's a good product. Yeah, the iPad market, I think, that's a bit harder because I think, everybody's trying to find a fit as a bit, from the business side, is it going to compete with something like the Surface or the Microsoft tablets? It doesn't quite have that functionality, but is it more than a device, for entertainment and that lean back experience in the home? So it's, well, I think it's going to be a bit of wait and see if they do more with the iPad and if that makes a difference to really boost sales over the long term.
All right. Well, Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, has just started speaking on the earnings call, so we're going to listen in and bring you any headlines as we have them. Shira, last word. Even if AirPods are doing well, the iPad is doing better. Is the iPhone all that matters?
The Apple is the iPhone company for the foreseeable future, yes.
All right, Shira Ovide, Bloomberg Gadfly, thanks so much for stopping by. Julie Osk, you're going to be coming back to me later this hour.
Can I come back for Facebook?
Yes. Sticking with earnings, Sony's turnaround seems to be on the right track. The company reported quarterly profit that topped analyst estimates. Sony saw strong demand for smartphone camera chips, a healthy music business, and brisk sales of its PlayStation 4 consoles and games. Operating profit was $1.4 billion in the first fiscal quarter, beating analyst average projection. Coming up, shares of Sprint soaring after its CEO, Marcelo Claure, says a deal decision is, quote, in the near future. We will explore next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Paytm, India's largest digital payment startup, is said to be taking aim at WhatsApp. According to the Wall Street Journal, Paytm is preparing to introduce messaging into its app. The company is looking to expand its user base of 220 million. Earlier this year, Paytm raised $1.4 billion from SoftBank, the largest funding round from a single investor for the country's tech sector. Sticking with SoftBank, it is the parent company of Sprint, which reported earnings earlier today. The company overcame its second straight quarter of subscriber losses and posted its first profit in 3 years. Shares soared as much as 12% today. CEO Marcelo Claure saying a decision on a possible merger is, quote, close at hand during the company's earnings call. This in reference to Sprint's positive merger discussions with both T-Mobile and Charter Communications. Joining us now to break it all down, Bloomberg Technology's Peter Elstrom. So what does he mean, Peter?
Well, in terms of the financial report, there were some positive signs here. As you mentioned, there was a profit finally after 3 years of losses. That was a step in the right direction, but the company did lose subscribers again. This is at the same time when all 3 of its competitors actually added subscribers. So in terms of the business, it seems like Sprint is continuing to struggle. What investors really took some positive notion from was this idea that finally Sprint was going to be able to reach some sort of agreement with one of the merger partners that it's been talking to. The question is who and exactly how that deal is going to get done. It's been talking with T-Mobile, of course. It's also been in discussions with Charter, as we've reported.
So what are prospects for an actual deal?
Well, it depends on how the deal is structured. It seems like quite a long shot. T-Mobile seems like a more reasonable deal. The 2 companies could merge. You'd combine the 2 wireless entities. You'd probably get a lot of cost savings out of the 2 businesses. A bigger challenge would actually be combining with Charter. Charter already has a market cap of more than $100 billion. Sprint is discussing a quite complex merger where it would raise a bunch of money, create a new entity, put Sprint into this entity, and put Charter into this entity. It's a very high degree of difficulty. At the same time, Masayoshi Son has been very aggressive in terms of pursuing these deals.
Let's talk about that and whether SoftBank can actually raise the money to do this.
Well, sources have told us that he has already started lining up financing for this, and he has at least $65 billion in commitments so far. Remember, Japan's banks have been very compliant in terms of lending him money as he's gone on these deal hunting sprees. So it's possible that he could actually come up with the capital, even though it would obviously load a whole bunch more debt onto his balance sheet.
So let's say a deal happens. How does that change the entire ecosystem? What are the new dynamics?
Well, the idea, at least in theory, is that you would combine some of the cable infrastructure that you've got with Charter, some of the wireless infrastructure that you've got with Sprint, and you'd be able to deliver a whole range of new services, not just traditional cable or wireless services, but internet services on top of that that would go above and beyond what we have today. The question is whether you could actually execute that. Sprint, of course, went through a disastrous merger with Nextel in the past. Mergers are very hard to pull off, especially between fundamentally different businesses.
So let's talk a little bit about leadership, especially if a deal with T-Mobile comes about. And obviously, we've seen the CEO, John Legere, and Marcelo Claure, the CEO of Sprint, sparring very publicly. Who's going to run this company?
Well, only one person gets to run it in the end. At this point, T-Mobile looks like it's the stronger company, so the negotiations would be over who, in fact, gets to run the business going forward. Both CEOs would have a case to make for themselves. I think at this point, T-Mobile is stronger, so you would anticipate that Legere would continue to run the business, but it's not clear. It depends on how forcefully SoftBank wants to back their guy.
All right, Peter Elstrom, Bloomberg Tech in town from Tokyo. Thanks so much for that update. We're listening into the Apple call. Shares hitting fresh highs after hours, now up more than 6%. $159 a share. CEO Tim Cook just spoke about the strength of the iPhone. Take a listen.
iPhone results were impressive, with especially strong demand at the high end of our lineup. iPhone 7 was our most popular iPhone, and sales of iPhone 7 Plus were up dramatically compared to 6S Plus in the June quarter last year. The combined iPhone 7 and 7 Plus family was up strong double digits year over year. 1 decade after the initial iPhone launch, we have now surpassed 1.2 billion cumulative iPhones sold.
The UK is making another move to prepare for Brexit. The Treasury is proposing a new national investment fund to help close a $5.3 billion funding gap between American and British tech startups. The fund would provide money and other incentives to the country's most promising startups. Almost 40% of all the funding for UK-based venture capital firms comes from the EU-backed European Investment Fund. And it's been some time, but Uber and Didi are once again going head-to-head, this time in Northern Europe. The Chinese giant is backing Estonia's Taxify with a financial investment and support on tech developments. The partnership is Didi's first major move into Europe and will give Taxify a boost to grow in cities across the continent. Joining us now from London, Bloomberg Caroline Hyde. So Caroline, how exactly will this work?
It will work by pushing into 18 countries that Taxify is already prominent within. It's giving it money. We don't exactly know how much. There's reports of some 8-figure amounts being whirled around the market. We don't know how much money, but they're also going to be helping them with the technological developments at Taxify, which itself is only a 4-year-old startup, but already claims to have some 2.5 million users across 18 different countries. These largely are emerging markets at the moment. We're talking in Africa, the likes of Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa. They're also present across Eastern Europe, Romania, Hungary. But there are big ambitions to come right here in London, in the UK, also to push into Paris. So this is really about scaling and once again just taking the battle to Uber, which is in large part the #1 player in a lot of those countries.
And of course, we've been covering the scandals at Uber ad nauseum, sexual harassment issues, culture clashes. Has this impacted the brand of Uber in Europe at all?
I think it certainly has here in London. It's something that has been well noted. And I think the main problem is there isn't really a competitor that people have been able to switch to. Lyft doesn't exist outside really the United States. It's not here in London, that's for sure. So it wasn't an easy, obvious rival to go to that was of a similar price point. Instead, there are various apps that you can use different taxis on, for example. But I think the brand has been dented and maybe people will turn to a different organisation with ease. You've also, though, got a lot of regulatory issues when it comes to the UK, particularly London black cabs have been pushing back. In Paris, you've got the same. In France and notably in Germany has really been somewhere that Uber has struggled to make inroads. They've really had to only align themselves with official licensed taxi firms. They haven't been able to really dig deep into the usual means of anyone being able to drive a car and take people around. So the regulatory question is big here, I think.
So we've seen, of course, Uber pull out of Russia, essentially, though take a big stake there, pull out of China, essentially. Are they threatened in the European market as well?
That's going to be a really interesting question. As you said, they partnered up with Yandex, but again, taking a minority stake in their combined venture, exactly in the same way that they did with Didi over in China. And it'll be interesting as to whether they have to scale back in Europe, in countries perhaps where they haven't managed to wheel a deal as well as they would have liked to, and particularly where there have been some regulatory hurdles. Just thinking back earlier this year, they had to pull out of Denmark, for example, because they said, look, the regulation that was about to come in didn't make it sensible for them to remain in that country. But they're really being attacked at all fronts by Didi. Didi's taking them on not only in Africa and Europe, but really Asia is where it's been hurting. We saw there the likes of Grab in Southeast Asia, Ola in India, Lyft in the US. These are all the competitors that Didi has got into bed with, and it really feels like Uber's being, well, kicked while it's down.
Is Didi going to actually have any local teams in Europe?
That's something we've really got to get to the bottom of. As yet, that has not been reported. They seem to be just getting into bed with Taxify, which already has a team in Estonia and is, as I say, across 18 different countries. We'll have to see whether they set up shop in the United Kingdom. But as we understand, when they push into London later this year, and indeed eyeing up the likes of Paris, I'm sure Taxify will indeed come, and maybe that's where some of the financial help coming from Didi will help. They will be able to put people on the scene, manage to hire teams. So it'll be interesting to see how much then Didi starts to come to play on this side of the Atlantic as well.
So when do we expect to see the results of these new efforts to push into Europe?
I think certainly this year. I mean, in the next few weeks, I understand that Taxify is going to be making a trip to the United Kingdom, so they could be already laying the groundworks, and we could certainly see the moves into these new countries coming thick and fast. Certainly this side of 2017 seems to be where the actually view is to expand, but at the moment it seems to be doubling down on already where they are prevalent within the 18 countries. As I say, they've got a big area that they want to expand into. If you're looking at being, as they claim, the #1 in Europe and Africa. At the moment, they're #2 to Uber. They want to become the #1 player. That's a lot of ground that they've got to put into work, and 18 countries just doesn't quite suffice. So I'm sure that amount of money that we don't quite know exactly how much is will be being put to work ASAP.
All right, Caroline Hyde, thank you much for that report. We'll see you later on in the show. Now, Uber is getting more competition in Bangkok. According to reports, Japan's Line is expanding its taxi service to the city. The company will start offering it by the end of the year. It'll team up with the Bangkok Taxi Cooperative Network and initially operate about 20,000 cars. Now, in today's revolving door, Tesla's director of battery technology, Kurt Kelty, has left the company. According to his LinkedIn, he joined Tesla in 2006, making him one of the longest-serving executives at the automaker. And Tesla is said to be overvalued. This according to hedge fund investor David Einhorn. Einhorn, who is betting against Tesla stock, cited on a conference call that he is worried about the company's cash burn. And a check on Apple shares. They are soaring in late U.S. trading as the company projects revenue in the current quarter that topped analyst estimates, signaling strong sales of new iPhones scheduled to be released later this year. Sales will be $49 billion to $52 billion in the 3 months through September. Analysts had projected $49.1 billion. We will break down all these results, get you some of the conference call headlines from CEO Tim Cook. They're talking about Apple Pay, talking about augmented reality. We will bring all of that to you. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of First Word News. By a vote of 92 to 5, the Senate has confirmed Christopher Wray as the next director of the FBI. Wray won unanimous support from the Senate Judiciary Committee last month. He replaces former Director James Comey, who was fired by President Trump in May. In the wake of recent tensions between Washington and Moscow, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says he'll meet this weekend with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Manila on the sidelines of a meeting of Southeast Asian foreign ministers.
I think the American people want the two most powerful nuclear nations in the world to have a better relationship. I don't think the American people want us to have a bad relationship with a huge nuclear power.
Nearly 500 suspects, including generals and military pilots, went on trial in Turkey. They're accused of leading last year's failed coup and carrying out attacks from an air base in Ankara. Turkey blames followers of U.S.-based cleric Fethullah Gulen for the coup attempt and will try him in absentia. The failed coup killed at least 249 people last July. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is urging all Venezuelans to prevent further violence and push for political dialogue. More than 100 people have died in protests against President Nicolas Maduro. Two leading opposition figures were also taken from their homes Monday night, accused of violating terms of their house arrest. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. Tuesday here in New York, 7:30 Wednesday morning in Sydney. My colleague Paul Allen has a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Well, Nikkei futures looking positive in Japan and plenty to watch out of there today. Mitsubishi UFJ, for starters, reporting very strong results after the close on Tuesday. First quarter net income surging 53% to $2.6 billion. UFJ is already a third of a way to its full year target. Sony also profit beating $1.4 billion thanks to demand for smartphone camera chips and good demand for the PlayStation 4, and a lot more earnings out of Japan today as well from Japan Tobacco. Mitsubishi Corporation, and Mazda. Here in Australia, the ASX is looking kind of flat as earnings season ramps up here as well. Rio Tinto will announce after the close. That's expected to be a good result on a stronger iron ore price. And take a look at the Aussie dollar. That eased back on Tuesday's Reserve Bank of Australia statement. The cash rate held at 1.5% as expected, but the RBA getting a bit more aggressive on its jawboning for the currency. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. Our top story this hour, Apple's third quarter earnings report. Investors are pleased with the company's updated fourth quarter guidance, sending shares higher and after hours trading. On the analyst call, CEO Tim Cook spoke about the promise of Apple's latest efforts in augmented reality. Take a listen.
We believe AR has broad mainstream applicability across education, entertainment, interactive gaming, enterprise, and categories we probably haven't even thought of. With hundreds of millions of people actively using iPhone and iPad today, iOS will become the world's biggest augmented reality platform as soon as iOS 11 ships.
We're also learning more about Apple's international revenue as we do. Revenue for Greater China down 10% year over year, but that decline is slowing. Joining us now, Bloomberg Tech's Peter Elstrom in town from Tokyo, and still with us to discuss all things Apple, Julie Osk, principal analyst at Forrester. So Peter, I did ask Tim Cook if he sensed a turnaround in China because that decline is slowing, and he said the results were encouraging, improved better than even they thought they might. What's your take?
Well, of course, it would be better if sales were actually increasing in China. China's been such an important market for Apple over the past few years, and the last 4 quarters have been very difficult for Apple. Competition is rising from a range of competitors. Huawei, Oppo, Vivo, Xiaomi has been particularly strong. It's interesting, just last week, Huawei had a meeting with analysts and investors, and they talked about what they're preparing in the consumer segment. They talked specifically about the next iPhone, and the head of the consumer business seemed to know quite a bit about it. And they said that they have a phone ready that they think is going to be better on the specs. It's going to have better wireless charging, a better camera. He went down a whole range of characteristics, and then he said the price is going to be about half of what Apple is planning on charging. It's going to be tough for Apple in China.
The competitors are aggressive there. I did ask Tim Cook about this at WWDC when I got to sit down with him and talk to him about China over the long term. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We make all of our decisions for the long term. And so we're not investing for next quarter or next year. We're thinking about many, many years out. And as I stand back and look at China, I see mega trends there that make China an incredible market.
Julie, what's your take on the prospects for Apple in China?
Yeah, so I'd have to agree with what Peter said as well, is that it's it's a big market. I agree that they're investing for the long term, and I think it's always hard to compare them to some of the other competitors because more and more, because they're certainly targeting a higher end of the market, and more it's going to be about the package of services, the quality of the voice services that come with it, and I think there's a lot of unknowns there.
And what about India? I did ask Tim Cook when India is going to start picking up for China, and he said they are investing heavily there. He's very optimistic about that market. When will we see, a more measurable contribution?
Apple's a tiny player in India right now. Their products are just too expensive for that market right now. They could get around some of the tariffs if they begin to do some of the assembly and manufacturing in the country. They're in discussions to do more of that, but still they need to come in with low-end phones in India to get any sort of substantial market share.
Let's talk a little bit about the iPad. iPad sales, had been struggling, but this quarter we did see an increase. Take a listen to what Cook had to say about the iPad moments ago on the call.
Our iPad product lineup is stronger than ever. The new iPad we launched in March offers great value and performance, and the all-new 10.5-inch iPad Pro launched in June features the world's most advanced display with ProMotion technology and is more powerful than most PC desktops.
There have been a lot of concerns about the iPad, especially when it comes to cannibalization. The phones are now bigger. Do people still need the iPads? They got rid of the iPad mini. How much does the iPad matter?
Yeah, so I think that's exactly the right question to ask. Like, how much does it matter? When smartphones are still the biggest category, when the overall global market for smartphones is still going to grow by 50% in terms of total, people with smartphones over the next 5 years, I think you're asking exactly the right question. How much does it really matter?
What do you think about his comments about augmented reality as a measure of future growth, or
So
something to come?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the big categories, and I think if I'm Apple, I'm always talking about my strengths, and I think things like augmented reality is a place where they've made a lot of investments, and there's a lot of exciting applications there that include social media, include gaming, include business applications as well, and I think that's an easier place to talk. I think there's also a lot of excitement around like the voice assistants and those that are coming out, but Apple doesn't yet have that product in the market.
Right. HomePod coming later this year. We will be watching that. Julie, you're sticking with me. Peter Elstrom in town from Tokyo. Thanks so much for stopping by. Now, to a Bloomberg scoop, Facebook is said to be developing a video chat device for the home. It would mark the first major hardware product for its Building 8 lab. The product could be announced as soon as next spring. Joining us to discuss all the details, Bloomberg Tech's Sarah Fryer, who helped break this story. So, Sarah, what do we know?
Well, this is going to be basically video chat, FaceTime, as you know, on steroids. It's going to be a big screen, the size of a laptop on a stick in your living room, that will have a really high-end camera that will allow you to talk with people as if it's a more immersive experience. I mean, one of Zuckerberg's goals for the future is to bring people closer together, and this Building 8 hardware lab, led by Regina Dugan, they want to come up with technology that would sort of prevent us from having to be tethered to our phones, that we can sort of be in a physical environment and enjoying our lives, but still feel like other people can share those moments with us. So that's the high level.
Regina Dugan, longtime former Google executive, high hopes for her. Julie, do people want a device like this?
Well, I think Facebook has to make a play in the hardware space. If you look at where the future growth is going to come, we have 33% of consumers using some kind of a voice or a virtual assistant or a device like this in the home today. 33% using some kind of voice assistant, 8% using a hardware device like this in the phone, and voice services and services like Facebook is describing are absolutely critical to the future of digital experience, and Facebook has to make a play here, or they'll be left out.
So, Sarah, what else do we know about what they're working on and how that would position Facebook vis-a-vis Google, which has Google Home, and Amazon, which has the Echo, and Apple, which is coming out with the HomePod?
So first of all, this voice touchscreen device could get a lot more fancy. You could add a 360-degree camera. The camera they're currently working on has this sensor technology that can lock in on things that move. So say if your grandmother's calling in to talk to your kid, he can hold up a painting and the camera will follow it. The other thing that Facebook is working on is something similar to the Google Home and Alexa devices you were talking about, just a more simple speaker that can use the Facebook-powered AI assistant that they've been working on. So that's sort of a lower-end device, but we've heard from our sources that that kind of thing could be killed considering the competition in the market right now.
Okay, so Julie, if all of the big four tech giants are doing the same thing, essentially, with slightly different tweaks, who's in the best position to succeed here, or is it anyone's game?
It's still really anyone's game, and everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. Building a piece of hardware isn't hard to do, but assembling the services and doing voice well with like language generation, language understanding is very, very hard to do. Google knows a lot about our day-to-day lives. Apple's got a great connected ecosystem of products already in my home. Amazon knows a lot about my music and my shopping habits. Facebook knows a lot about my social media habits. And
there's a lot of doesn't really make hardware, right?
And they don't make hardware. It's very, very hard to do, and it's very hard. The secret here is in the setup and how the ease of use feature plays out here, as well as just how well it's done. And this is still very, very hard to do. Like I said, only 8% of consumers in the U.S. have one of these devices, and this is probably going to be a device we find in everyone's home within the next 5 to 10 years.
All right,
so it's essential.
Huge potential for growth. Okay, Julie Osk of Forrester, thanks so much for stopping by. Sarah Fryer, great reporting by you guys on the tech team. Now, staying with Facebook, the company is acquiring AI startup Oslo. It's seen as a way to boost its virtual assistant in its Messenger app. The majority of Oslo employees are expected to move into the Messenger team at Facebook. Coming up, Amazon is known as a major disruptor from consumer electronics to streaming services. Why their next big push may put the likes of PayPal and Visa on notice. Next. And later, Bitcoin has split. What it means for investors in the digital currency. This is Bloomberg. Now to a stock we are watching. Canadian e-commerce platform Shopify soared today and hit a record high. That's after the company beat analyst revenue estimates for a 9th straight quarter. The company booked over $150 million in sales, beating the average analyst estimate of $144 million. Shopify's growth comes as spending continues to shift from physical stores to online retailers. Well, Amazon has been on the disruption path for some time now, as we were just discussing, from its shift into consumer electronics, pitting it against Apple and Google, to the $13.7 billion acquisition of Whole Foods to push further into groceries. What's next in Amazon sights? Well, according to Sanford C. Bernstein senior research analyst Lisa Ellis, it could be payments, as the e-commerce giant further promotes Amazon Pay, its service for making payments online and on mobile. Joining us now to discuss from New York, Lisa Ellis herself. So Lisa, tell us about Amazon's efforts in payments and what it all means.
Yes, absolutely. So, Amazon, the real risk here to the incumbent payments players like Visa and PayPal and MasterCard is that Amazon decides to build its own PayPal, similar to how PayPal was built off of the eBay platform and Alipay was built off of the Alibaba platform. Both of those separate payments entities now have over $70 billion in market cap and are pretty formidable players on the payments stage. So that's the real risk. And the reality is Amazon both has more of the capabilities to do that and is further down the path to doing that than you might think. On the capability side, the trick to building a payments network is that you have to overcome the chicken and egg problem. You need users and merchants. Well, a player like Amazon has both of those. They have over 300 million merchants, and they have over 300 million consumers and over 2 million merchants on the platform already. Plus, they've got the technology capabilities of Amazon Web Services, which can help them in building out their payments capabilities. And they've got sheer scale, of course. They're over 10% of global e-com sales. They're also, though, further down the path of doing this than might be visible. They've been actively promoting the Amazon Pay button off of the Amazon platform. We recently ran a consumer survey, and it was one of the top buttons that payment checkout buttons that consumers have highlighted that they've been using.
What's interesting about payments, Lisa, is that these different payments companies and services aren't necessarily apples to apples. Of course, you've got Apple Pay. They've been talking about that on the Apple earnings call. There's PayPal. What does this mean for competitors to Amazon Pay?
Yes. So for the direct competitors to an Amazon Pay, like a PayPal, that's particularly concerning because PayPal's kind of core customer set is a small and medium merchant trying to do sales online. Amazon is directly targeting that same small and medium merchant that might be currently selling their goods to the Amazon platform. It's very competitive.
And compare it to Alibaba and Alipay.
Yes, so similar to how we're familiar with PayPal building up on here in the U.S., Alipay built up as part of the Alibaba online platform, which is very similar to Amazon in China. Alipay just recently, though, has spun out and is now under Ant Financial and is starting to expand pretty aggressively internationally as well. They've recently acquired MoneyGram here in the U.S. and are trying to expand internationally.
Amazon is venturing into so many different new businesses. Of course, we have groceries. Do you think there are any antitrust issues or regulatory issues on the horizon?
The regulatory issue they may run into, and one of the areas we're watching closely is they've recently launched Amazon Reload, which is a service where they're encouraging consumers to actually store money in a balance in their Amazon account. When we've seen other players do that in other contexts in payments, that can sometimes run afoul of the CFPB, or the banking regulations entities, right, who are concerned that that looks and feels too much like a deposit account or a checking account.
All right, Lisa Ellis, Sanford C, Bernstein, Senior Research Analyst. Thanks so much for that report. Coming up, we've got more of Bloomberg Technology. We'll be talking about Bitcoin. Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde will be back with us from London. Apple CEO Tim Cook taking questions on the investor call. Take a listen to what he just had to say about job creation in the United States.
We've created 2 million jobs in the U.S., and we're incredibly proud of that. We do view that we have a responsibility in the U.S. To increase economic activity, including increasing jobs, because Apple could have only been created here.
Apple CEO Tim Cook there. We are listening into the final minutes of that investor call, and we'll bring you any headlines as we have them. Moving now to Bitcoin. History has been made in the cryptocurrency space. The #1 digital currency, Bitcoin, has split in two. This comes after a long debate about how to scale Bitcoin and increase block size. Those are the files in which transactions are recorded, causing some miners to start a new strand called Bitcoin Cash. Joining us now for the very latest, Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde. From London. And Caroline, you have been following this Bitcoin progression incredibly closely. Tell us what's behind the split.
The split is really almost philosophical in nature. It's what they want to see Bitcoin become. Part of the ecosystem is very much wanting to see Bitcoin remain basically a store of value, as it has been, an alternative to gold, a safe digital asset class. But there's also been a growing clamour really for the scalability to keep up, the fact that transactions have become sluggish and costly. How do you scale? And they managed to compromise this so far with a so-called SegWit 2, it was called, SegWit 2X, which was a software update that they managed to get most of the ecosystem to agree to increase the block sizes. That's where you record the transactions on the blockchain and increase them double to 1 megabyte to 2 megabytes. That wasn't enough for a small group of Asian entrepreneurs and investors and developers. They wanted even more scalability. They wanted to go from 1 megabyte to 8 megabytes, and it happened today with Bitcoin Cash. So almost like a stock split, in the same way that they had a same history. Now we have two different currencies going a different direction. Instead of fostered on different business models, they're supported by different digital technologies underlying them. The protocol, the so-called blockchain, is now different.
So what does this actually mean for Bitcoin traders?
A lot of volatility, a lot of question marks, a lot of hand-wringing, and actually a decision as to whether you want to back Bitcoin Cash or not. Because what we've actually seen is that not everyone, the whole ecosystem, is going to back this new digital currency. If you own Bitcoin right now, you're allowed to get Bitcoin Cash automatically. But that's only if you've had your Bitcoin stored in the supportive wallets, in the supportive areas and companies that will, and exchanges that will allow you to have both Bitcoin and get Bitcoin Cash as well. The likes of, for example, Fred Wilson, who interestingly is a backer of Coinbase, the biggest exchange out there. He says, I don't want Bitcoin Cash. Keep it, because I don't believe in the underlying technology for now. So if you're a Bitcoin holder, you've actually seen a lot of turbulence, a lot of people suddenly withdrawing their Bitcoins out of the exchanges, such as Coinbase, because they weren't going to be able to get hold of Bitcoin Cash, and then trying to put it into an exchange such as Kraken, which did. So I think for the time being, you're seeing a lot of people just trying to work out where the prices go. I can tell you that about 3 hours ago, the first Bitcoin Cash, the new digital currency, was mined, and at the moment it's trading at about just 1/10 of the price of Bitcoin original.
Fred Wilson, Caroline, also told us he's very bullish about other cryptocurrencies, specifically Ethereum. What's next for Bitcoins? Will we see more offshoots?
I think this is what's so interesting that you raise Ethereum, because actually this happened to Ethereum. Last year, we saw a division, a so-called hard fork, a split in Ethereum, and that's why you've got something called Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. Ethereum Classic never really took off. Will that be the demise of Bitcoin Cash as well? But many out there are now saying we could see a new precedent being set. The worry of the first fork is, could we see yet more and more? We now got a new, more penetrable Bitcoin. Many felt that overall this was the joy of Bitcoin, that it was immutable. Now that's been undone. So that's the key question. Could this keep on happening? The key is, though, that the strongest will survive.
All right, Caroline Hyde for us there in London. Thanks so much, Caroline, for that Bitcoin report. We've been listening into the Apple earnings call. Someone just asked a question about cars, the Apple Car project. Tim Cook saying Apple is making a big investment in autonomous systems, and he adds that autonomous systems mean more than just cars. He's expanding there on something that I asked him about back in June at WWDC. A little bit more of a hint about what it looks like under the hood of Apple's autonomous and car ambitions. That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Tech. We are live streaming, of course, on Twitter. Have a wonderful day.